I might have forgotten to introduce myself. I'm the director of the Koret Shelter Medicine Program at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. Follow us on Facebook if you haven't already, Facebook/Shelter Medicine. We're trying to catch up with the ASPCA, and we have 1.3 million likes to go. So, now we do post our breaking news there, as well as on our website, sheltermedicine.com. So, got some really good questions over the break, but I want to go through some of the other programs, alternatives, ideas that are out there, and then sort of take questions when we have a few more specifics to respond to. We have
Turn the lights down again.
Sutter example, but then there are some other options out there as well. This is the very short version, and I actually brought 6 copies of a handout of step-by-step how
One
to
per
do
group.
this, because I was hoping that there would be no more than 6 shelters who haven't already heard this spiel.
We'll email you if we can get it.
Oh, and you found it. Excellent. And I only have 6 because I was trying to print this on my home computer, and it was randomly not printing certain pages, and so it took me till midnight last night to get these 6 and like 500 trees worth of paper. But here is my basic thought of how to make sure we're hammering our nails with hammers and blow drying our hair with hair dryers. Expand the options for live release for cats as you are able. So, step 1. What is that? Mostly TNR. Schedule, so you don't have to totally deny intake for all cats, but you can schedule intake for adoptable cats. And you can decline intake for unadoptable cats, offer other resources, and then devote your attention and consideration and energy to developing other programs to solve the problems that we once hallucinated that we were solving through randomly uptaking, holding, killing, and disposing of healthy cats. So we're going to talk about what are some of those specific ideas. How many of you are familiar with feral freedom? Okay, so some of you. How many of you are familiar with TNR? Pretty widely accepted that it is okay, and even the National Animal Control Association now supports this activity. They really didn't when I was an animal control officer. That if there are cats in the community and you pick them up and fix them, you can put them back where you found them. But somehow magically we thought if they came into a shelter, then we really couldn't fix them and put them back. That would somehow be bad. Even if nobody specifically requested that we not do that. And the hope with the TNR program is in part that it might prevent a cat from coming into the shelter someday. If you take a cat that's come into the shelter that is not a good candidate for adoption and you fix it and you put it back where you found it, it's 1 for 1. You avoided euthanasia of 1 cat, for sure. And the beauty of it is that it pleases that 80% of people that would rather they not be killed than left where they are, but maybe is annoyed or is worried about the cat. So it resolves a lot of the concerns, the welfare of the cat improves, and the nuisance behaviors of the cat decrease, and the problem doesn't continue to perpetuate itself. So this was sort of the insight of what was originally called feral freedom, since feral freedom sounds like the wild cats roaming the streets, creating havoc. We like to call it a community cat trap, neuter, return program. But the basic principle of this is that healthy cats can still be brought to the shelter by citizens. This could be on a scheduled basis or an unrestricted, just the way it is now. But instead of holding the cat and euthanizing it if it can't, if it doesn't tame down and you can't find it a barn home, you just fix it and put it right back. If it wasn't really broken, if it's in good body condition, you know where it came from. It already had things sorted out where it came from. You're not disrupting a new ecosystem. You're not relocating it to a colony. And this is the majority of cats that come into shelters are not colony members. They're just a cat here and there from the community that somebody got worried or annoyed by. And there's different models. In some models, this is operated by, like, a public shelter does the intake and then just sets the cats literally in their trap on a shelf in their loading bay, and a private group comes, picks the cats up, does the surgery, and does the return. Another model is public shelter does the surgery, private group comes, gets the cats. One model is the surgery happens the very next day after the cat was taken in. Another model is it happens during the stray holding period and the cat is released back to where it was found. You know, TNR programs don't do a holding period. They just snatch the cat up wherever it is, fix it, and put it back. So it's not like you're taking it away from the ability to return it to its owner. Just if you were so careless as to leave your unidentified, unmicrochipped, intact cat out and about, well, that's the risk you take. It might come out back to you minus one piece of its ear and one piece of its insides. And I have in the handout, you can download a whole guide to how the original Feral Freedom program was set up. But that was a well-funded, quite a large program at a large shelter, and I think there's much smaller versions, and including what Dr. Delaney is doing without funding at this time in Yolo County.
We do have a little bit of funding, we just haven't started using it. We got a PetSmart grant for $42,000 for targeting certain TNR services.
So this started in the city of Jacksonville, big community, and it's kind of like the numbers that we worked out for Sutter. They were impounding 13,365 cats. That was a lot of cats, but their estimated number of community cats was 143,000. So once we looked at it that way, we were like, well, if we do 10%, 8%, 12%, if we kill them, if we fix them and put them back, not going to make a difference for the birds, right? Average population of 200 to 300 cats in the shelter, and in the year that they took in 13,000, they adopted out 521. And I was part of a team that went to evaluate the shelter, and as you can imagine, it was a hard place to spend a couple of weeks. But it was an easy place to say, well, let's try something different than this, because we hate every single thing about this. So they started it with all feral cats were just picked up as soon as they came into the shelter. They never went into the shelter itself. But importantly, they were still counted as an intake for the shelter. So the shelter could still count that as part of their intake and live release for their funding purposes. They needed to be able to say, hey, we're still going through some of the work of taking these animals in. And then I was actually standing out in the parking lot, so I like to think I had a little contribution to make, watching the feral cats get picked up and thinking about what was happening for the non-feral cats who still had only about a 1 in 10 chance of getting out of the shelter alive. And I said, well, God help you if you purr. Like, why should you be punished just because you can be vaccinated? And so they expanded the program to include a much wider definition of feral, to be a cat that doesn't have an owner and is in good body condition, and if it was admitted to the shelter, very likely it would be euthanized. So we can expand, you know, as I said, no matter where they are on their continuum, bringing them into the shelter means they're not going to have a good outcome, just because maybe you can't even have good outcomes for all the friendly cats that come to you. Why do that? So they're vaccinated, they're ear tipped, some programs microchip if they have the funding for it, and then they're released by someone who works for within the nonprofit to the location where they were originally picked up. Yeah.
Can I just mention that I just was in San Jose, and the cat folks there swear by the importance of the microchip, because it's what's allowing them to prove that these cats aren't showing back up, that they're not driving complaints, because they get so few of their own cats back.
So I think that's really important. And it's great that San Jose has the funding to do that. I want to give you a range of options. And if microchip is in the budget, awesome. Do a microchip. There's a lot of value in that. As Jennifer pointed out, that then you can know for sure the tiny percentage of cats that are actually coming back.
And that's just something, while these are pilots, like while these are new, until we can, really demonstrate that. Maybe not every community needs to do that, but we need to do it in enough places to be able to get past that notion that people have that that there's going to be this high complaint, you know, or high return rate. And so we want to do enough tracking of it to get past that.
So, certainly if you have the budget to even do it for a short time period, as you pilot the program, that might be a way to sell it to a community and say, you know what, we're going to do 200. And then we're going to see, like, are they coming back in droves? We don't expect so based on the San Jose experience. We also do ear tip them, so if there's not a lot of other people ear tipping in your community, you can have a sort of a guess that if you're not getting, you know, if you ear tipped 1,000 cats and put them back and then you're only getting 20 ear tip cats back in, you can have some notion of that.
And in our place, we don't have the money for the chipping, so I actually just do a deeper ear tip than anybody else I know of, so I know my cats. Like, oh, that's my ear tip, so.
And so this is the effect of the Feral Freedom program in Jacksonville. This was their average shelter daily population before, and so you can see they were up to over 300 cats in the shelter. They sometimes had 2 unrelated adult cats to a cage. It's pretty dismal. And then this was their daily population after, and so what it meant was like a big cage and a bed, and staff that had time to breathe and have 5 minutes to take care of a cat instead of less than 2 minutes to take care of a cat. So it had a big effect on the cats that remained in the shelter. This was sort of their live release without the program, and then live release with the program in place. And again, this is only going through 2010, but that has continued. So yay for that program. If only it was always that easy, huh? The city of San Jose has a slightly different model, as I said, where they do the intake, they do the spay and neuter surgery during the straight holding period, they vaccinate for rabies, they microchip, they ear tip, and do the recovery, and then at the end of the straight holding period, they use the requirement that municipal shelters release to a rescue unit to say, hey, whether we want to do anything with these cats or not, this rescue group is demanding them. So what can we do? The rescue group. And then the rescue group actually is responsible for returning the cat to the area where it was found, and that's just the general vicinity of where it was found. And they actually put door hangers around to let people know, hey, you know, we did this as a service to you. Aren't you happy? And they have a website, catcenter.org, and they troubleshoot the complaints and the concerns, so if somebody is upset about it. That said, the officers have the discretion, if they're like, you know what, this is going to just be a huge problem and a huge crisis, and this person's getting violent, they can say, no, this is not a candidate for this program. We're going to handle this situation our old way or differently. We're going to try and relocate it. We'll put it to a barn home. But it collects that number of cats that needs that different handling to a much smaller and more manageable number, where it actually is more possible to find good outcomes for those cats that don't qualify for the program. So that's important also to think about. It doesn't have to be tomorrow 100%, much as I would like it to be. And you can check out catcenter.org just in terms of to see how they've sort of set up their resources. This is the predictable effects of this program. This is really pretty interesting. This is their euthanasia rate. This is when they implemented the program. So went from euthanizing over 7,000 cats to, in 2011, just about 3,000 cats. A really dramatic effect on euthanasia rate. And even in spite of the fact that they were doing a lot of things right already. They already had low-cost spay-neuter for owned pet cats, and they already had a good foster program. So they really needed this to push them a whole nother leap forward. That pink line is their rescue outcomes, so that went way up. And then their adoptions went up a little bit. But this was an interesting finding, that their dead cat pickup went down, and they haven't pulled officers off the street. So it suggests that there's just less cats. Contrary to our expectation that if we took the pressure off and stopped killing cats and just put them back, we would be up to our eyeballs in cats in a matter of mere months. In fact, it seems like there's less cats running around on the streets. And so someone was asking me about that sort of taking those cats that had the greatest intersection, the greatest sort of nuisance and interaction with our society, and spaying and neutering them, and then returning them, maybe stabilize those populations so that, in fact, that high intersection population is stabilizing in that community. Even though they're not reaching 50 or 75%, the cats they aren't reaching might be the ones that they got eaten by a coyote anyway a month later, or somebody adopted them anyway a month later, and they never were going to interact with the shelter system. So we're not sure why that is, but it's a striking finding. It certainly doesn't support our fears about these programs. And then they went from euthanizing 900 cats for URI to 90 cats for URI. And so that, speaks to my original point of I was just trying to figure out how to control URI. Turns out, partly having cats, having fewer cats coming in, having better outcomes for cats, helps to provide adequate care for cats, which is more fun anyway. And then the other thing is, a lot of times we back into a corner where we don't have enough live outcomes for cats, and so we don't make any decisions until some cats get sick. Then we euthanize them for URI, when in fact, if we would have just said, this is a fearful cat, it's not a good candidate for euthanasia, let's spay and neuter and put it back where we found it, we wouldn't have to euthanize the healthy, friendly cat for URI. We wouldn't have to sit around and wait until that kitten got really sick and euthanize that kitten, because we just took that timid cat, fixed it, put it back where it came from. And so they've also been able to be a lot more relaxed about, is this feral or isn't it? Well, it doesn't look like it's going to be a great candidate for adoption. So let's err on the side of assuming that it's a fearful cat, and we'll just fix it and put it back and hope that it goes home to its owner. So, with a good high-volume program, depending on what ancillary services are provided, you might be able to do this for $50 to $75 per cat. And that can be cheaper than good care and a prolonged length of stay and euthanasia and disposal. The sad reality in some communities is it's not going to be cheaper than just taking them in, providing minimal care, and euthanizing them and disposing of them in bulk. But you don't have to do it for every single cat. You could do it for however many cats you can afford to do it for, and do the Sutter plan or some other plan for other cats. It's certainly a much better target for donor support, for grants, for cost-sharing activities than taking up and killing cats. And these are just some other communities that are adopting this Elk Grove, one of our neighboring communities, one of the latest communities to succumb. Hooray! So that's a shelter-based TNR, community cat TNR program. And that could start very small. Could start to, just like Dr. Delaney started up, just let's wake up one morning and say, you know what, this cat, we don't want to euthanize this cat. Let's just put this cat back where it came from. And some communities have reported that it's actually better to sort of start it under the radar and just communicate to people like, this is what we do now. So that was the experience in Jacksonville. At first they told people, we're going to spay this cat and cut its ear off and put it back. And they were like, no! And then they were like, okay, thank you for the cat. Have a good day. And then the cat would just reappear. You look familiar.
It has an ear tip, so maybe it's not the same.
Yes. I swear, that other cat had looked just like that, but it had an ear.
Well, in San Francisco, they're doing this, and this woman who brought a cat, they basically tossed the cat back over her fence the next day, and she called the shelter saying, "My cat is magical now. It flies over." She literally thought that whatever they did to the cat made it magical.
Okay, don't throw the cat.
Now it's this really special cat that flew.
But what San Jose has gotten much more than complaints. What they've gotten is, oh, thank God. Like, if I'd known that this was what was going to happen, I would have brought the cat in a long time ago, instead of just bringing in all its kittens every year. And interestingly, people haven't seemed to take advantage of this as like their kind of risky, free spay-neuter program with like here, I'll just trap
So
this
what if they
cat,
do?
bring it to the shelter, and it'll reappear in my neighbor's yard, fixed, and minus its ear tip. But certainly you could say, hey, we've got limited capacity for that, so we only accept trapped cats, every other Tuesday. Ideally, you just, like, whenever a cat comes in, hey, you can bring it in, but you could certainly communicate, like we learned that in Sutter. You can communicate to your community members, we don't accept trapped cats, or, hey, we could accept trapped cats twice a month. Bring them on in. Something will happen. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about other things that can be complementary to a TNR program, or if you don't have the wherewithal for a TNR program right now, in part, and I was talking to somebody about this over the break, just removing all alternatives to TNR may inspire your community to start thinking, we now no longer have a magical option where cats disappear and we don't have to think about what happens to them. Now they're howling in the alleyway, and we can't take them into the shelter anymore. Maybe somebody should write a grant to start doing a little TNR, because the other alternative is gone. I'm worried about birds. I'd like to see the cat population controlled. Magically, the shelter won't take them away anymore. Maybe I want to mount a campaign to get people to keep their cats inside and help them with putting up cat fences. Or I want to start a TNR program so that these cats don't keep making more kittens to eat the birds that I care about. So this was a study that gave moviegoers free popcorn, and this was terrible popcorn. It was 5 days stale and had no salt. And they gave people either such an enormous bucket that they could never finish it, or such a hugely enormous bucket that they could crawl inside it and live there with the popcorn. So in either way, they couldn't finish the popcorn. And then they tested to see, like, how much popcorn did people eat of this terrible popcorn, and they couldn't finish the popcorn anyway. And if they had the huge bucket, they still ate way more popcorn, like 3 cups more of popcorn than if they had the huge, awful bucket of popcorn. And so the authors point out, like, if you just looked at how much popcorn people ate, you'd be like, oh, some of these people were gluttons, and some of these people were disgusting pigs that were deficient in their ability to inhibit their eating, and they didn't have enough hormone that tells them when they're full. But really, you just needed to give people smaller buckets of popcorn. And I think that's something that we fail to anticipate sometimes. Like, we just make the very easiest thing, call animal control, and have the cat disappear. And we just need to make it not the easiest thing. For stray cats, for pet cats. If bringing the cat into the shelter is going to mean we compromise the care of cats, or that the outcome for that cat is going to be euthanasia, let's make it really hard. So, we know that taking in cats, either beyond the capacity to provide live outcomes for them, when they should have live outcomes, or beyond the capacity to provide good care in any one time frame, is costly, and it's wasteful. Why take in twice as many cats as we can care for in a month, when we could take in half as many cats, find homes for them, and then take in some more cats and find homes for them? So we want to provide a clear message, which is different from the message I grew up with, that intake to the shelter is not always the best choice. You found a cat? Good for you. Now find the owner. You don't want your cat anymore? Good for you for being concerned about it. Here's some ways to rehome it. We can't do that for you right now. If we took it in, we would have to kill it. So let us talk with you about what to do, or if you want to hang on to it for a couple of weeks, then we can help you. So defer admission for adoptable cats, and then just figure out which cats aren't going to be able to be offered a live release outcome at your shelter. Either TNR is not an option for them, or adoption is not an option. They're just not going to move in your shelter. And just say, you know what? we're not going to offer euthanasia of that cat if it's not suffering and it's not dangerous. You'll have to work out a different solution. And use those savings to build community programs to help people keep cats in their homes, to spay and neuter pet cats as well as unowned cats, to provide low-cost veterinary services so that people can keep their cats, to deal with dogs in your community if that's the big problem that you have, to offer obedience training classes. Just cut out the part where you intake and euthanize healthy cats and do other stuff with that money. I can't believe I'm still running out of time. We have so much time. But here's just the breakdown that we did for Yolo County. And this was something that we did recently. How many of you do field pickups of healthy strays? A few of you. So they took in 678 normal, like cats that as far as we could tell weren't injured in 2011. So those 678 drives and gas time and officer time. And 411 of those cats were euthanized. And what we found when, it was almost the same number of cats that were coming in their night drop box. And when we closed the night drop box, cat intake from other methods, over the counter and field intake went up by about 200, but overall it dropped by 500. Boom, free. And so, boom, let's just stop doing field pickups. Let's make it not so easy. Let's take away the giant bucket. Then healthy ferals that people brought in over the counter, 177, 150 of those were euthanized. So at YOLO, there's some opportunity to do TNR with those. But for instance, at Sutter, they said, well, no, that's just not a service we're going to offer. We can't do TNR, and so we're not going to offer to have those animals euthanized. That's something that you can just do. And at the same time, provide people with the brochures, and we have information on our website. Dr. Delaney's developed information for her shelter. We can work together to develop information that's tailored to your community. But just say, nope, bucket's gone. Unadoptable owner surrenders. You know, the owner surrender hold in California is longer than the stray hold. 4 business days means 6 days of care. They took in 235 owner surrendered cats that were not sick or injured and euthanized 104 of those. So that was at least 600 days of care, 2 years of care that they spent on owner surrendered cats that were not suffering, that were euthanized. And we made that so easy for those owners. Yes, some of those owners would abandon their cat. And in some cases, those cats would come in as strays, and we could accept them or not, if they were in good shape or not, if we had a good live outcome for them or not. Some of those owners would then be motivated to inflict it on someone else because we wouldn't take it. Some of those owners would say, you know, like, we are not a farm society anymore. Most people, even if they say they're going to kill their animal, won't. And I love the response from the officers in Yolo County when they're like, well, if someone says that to us, that sounds like a good reason to go do a welfare check on all their pets and make sure everything is licensed.
There you go. A little penalty for being an a-hole.
And occasionally, maybe bad things will happen to those cats. But what we're sure is that in a year, 104 cats came in, were held, suffered, and were killed. And the shelter staff had to do that. And probably not all 104 of them would have something bad happen to them out in the world. Probably it would be a tiny fraction of that. So those are 3 things that shelters could just stop doing or slow down on doing right away. Or, you know, advise people. Have a tiny plan. But like the whole Sutter thing, that was way before we were ready. I was like, Bob, we weren't ready. But then it just worked out, you know, sometimes to not overplan it. Scheduled intake. How many of you are doing this? This is like, would you like it if your doctor just always had you come in whenever you felt a little ill or needed a checkup, but then if he couldn't see you for 2 weeks, you just sit in the waiting room? So, unlimited intake, such a value of open intake shelters, such a value that I grew up with, really is not doing a favor. People can wait. I have to wait to get rid of my batteries and my light bulbs. people can wait to get rid of either their own pet cat or a stray cat. It is not an emergency to have that cat off the street today instead of next week or next month. And, you know, again, this is going to take a little staff time, but this was a shelter that went through such a complicated process to decide to schedule intake. And then I was like, what database do you use? And they just sent me that thing. They just put the name of the cat on the thing, and then when they have room, because they adopted out a cat, they call, and if the person figured it out in the meantime, they cross it off. And they actually found that this went so quickly that they didn't have to have much delay between when people called and when they could take in a cat. But they built in a delay because they found when there was a delay, people figured it out in a lot of cases, and they just dramatically reduced their intake. And they actually coupled that with, at intake, a tool where they evaluated each cat and said, like, based on our history and our sort of scientific, very deliberate way of figuring out which cats are likely to be adopted from our shelter, your cat doesn't qualify. And at that shelter, they made the choice to allow people, like, to say, well, then I want you to euthanize my cat. And they would take the cat for euthanasia. Or the person could just take their cat home. You could make that choice, or you could just make the choice to say, that's just not a service. We don't have to offer that service, and we don't offer that service. We choose to spend that money on spay neuter or other things. And that might be the cat that pees outside the litter box, or, you know, just you already have several older shy cats up for adoption. You know it's going to take you a month or two to work through that inventory of older shy cats, and so there's no sense in bringing another older shy cat to sit for 3 months, 4 months in your shelter waiting for that rare adopter that takes an older shy cat. So you can say, hey, this falls into our hard to adopt category. We only hold 5 places in our hard to adopt category because we only have the ability to take really good long-term care of 5 cats. So you're going to have to wait for one of our hard to adopt places to open up. So does that make sense? So they do a combination of scheduled intake and some controlled intake, because otherwise, if you don't control intake, you might, you know, you take in 5 cats and 2 of them are kittens and they get adopted real fast, and then you have 2 spaces open up and you fill those with 1 kitten and 1 older shy cat, and then the kitten goes and you fill it with 1 more older shy cat, and all of a sudden your shelter's full. And then there's kittens growing up out in the community. So if you do scheduled intake, you want to reserve like 75% of the space in your shelter for faster track cats, and then know that you'll still serve as many of those harder to adopt cats as you ever did by having 5 or so of them available for adoption, but then not taking in more of them at any one time. Does that make sense? And I have a detailed description of how you can develop a numerical tool like that, or you can just base it, if you're a smaller organization, you can just base it on your experience, but I have information and more detailed stuff on that. Happy to come back and give a whole other talk on that. Can provide, and this might be as simple as some brochures or a website of, like, so you don't want to keep your cat, but you can't bring it in right now. Well, here's the number for the low-cost spay-neuter clinic if it's just driving you crazy because it's yowling and having babies. Here's where you can get low-cost veterinary care. Here's where you can get food. Here's some information about behavior. Here's some information about litter box training. Here's some information about how to write a great personal ad for a cat. And you can't bring it in, but you can sure put it on Craigslist. And then people are serving as your own hundreds of little off-site adoption centers, reaching into communities that you could never reach with your own resources. So this was a shelter that did scheduled intake, and they saw their intake go down by 25% just with that scheduling process. So again, you know, hundreds, thousands of cats saved just by scheduling intake. And their euthanasia rate, even including the ones that they euthanized at people's request, went down by 39%, and so they obtained a euthanasia rate without a feral cat program of 20% for cats. Pretty darn good. Dropped their length of stay, and they weren't the only game in town, but there was a slight increase, so there was a slight redirection, though not proportionate to their decline in intake at the other shelter. But then they were moving their cats so successfully and having such good health for their cats that they were able to more than compensate by transferring in more cats than the increase in intake. And they had these tiny little tragic cages that they combined 3 into 1. So every cat had an upstairs, downstairs suite, and a side-by-side suite. It's not my cat hotel, but still a lot nicer than a 2x2 stainless steel box. 3 2x2 stainless steel boxes. And then just say no is a real choice. When the alternative to saying no would be saying, yes, I will take in this cat beyond my capacity to provide good care and a life outcome and serve my community. So I think of just say no or scheduling intake is we've been bailing a rushing river with our little tin cup. We need to set down our tin cup and step slowly away from the river. And then dry off and think. Do we want to build a dam? Do we want to divert the flow? Do we want to build a boat? Do we want to learn to swim really well? What makes sense? But sometimes, first, we just have to stop. This is Sutter's cat room before the change and after. And now, in fact, we just rolled those cages right out of there. And last I knew, put dogs in there instead. And euthanasia, September through October of 2011, 337. Euthanasia, September through October of 2012, 31. What a shame if we waited another year. So remember, doesn't have to be all or nothing. If you did this for one cat, it would be better than changing not at all. So for sure, we want to continue to take in sick, injured, orphaned, bite cats, cats that are marauding old ladies and roving in gangs. We still want to respond when there's a particular hazard to wildlife, an environmentally sensitive location, cats are pooping in the sandbox of the nursery school. We still want to respond to those situations. Somebody's hoarding cats, we'll respond to those situations. But if we're not responding to 50, 60, 70% of the situations, we can do a much better job of responding to the ones that really do fall squarely in our laps. For sure, we want to continue taking in and rehoming cats that need to be rehomed to the very greatest extent that we possibly can, knowing that by declining to take in cats that are more than we can rehome, we'll actually be able to rehome more cats. So that was one of the responses, like, well, what about the person who, the owner died and the cat is old and it can't be out in the field? And like, yeah, bring that cat into the shelter, for sure. And then it has a much better chance that we can find it a home, because we're not trying to find a home for 7 timid cats that we can't find homes for. These are just some ideas for resources for finders, resources for people annoyed by ferals. This is all in the handout. It's all on our website. But just like, we know how to do this. We talk to people about raccoons all day. We can do this with cats. And then this is my short list of options. And I came here with a secret plan, which is that I would so love it if Northern California could be the place that starts this movement. For 140 years in the United States, we have been taking in healthy cats, killing them, and disposing of them on the taxpayers' and donors' dime. And it is time to stop. We've got the information, we've got the data, and we live in communities where, if that ever made sense, it no longer does. And we could be the ones to just say, hey, we tried it. And we knew that what we were doing wasn't going that well. And so we just tried something different. And then when we roll this out nationally, we can say, hey, call the people in Chico. Talk to Redding. Talk to Sutter. And I had this idea that maybe we would challenge ourselves, like, to come back here in 6 months and say, between the groups here, we killed 1,000 fewer cats. And we strategized combination of TNR, scheduled intake, deferred intake, declined intake, but new programs that resulted in 1,000 fewer cats coming in healthy and ending up dead. And I'm willing to talk to your city council, to work with you, to troubleshoot, to facilitate. Do you think we can do it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can do it.
Yes. How about if we pass that thing around and you put a number? I'm going to challenge you. Put
Like
a
Weight
number.
Watchers?
And you can make it small, but just like something that you can hit. 100. 300. Like, can you do it?
Just put it to the far right and circle it.
Put it to the far right. Circle it.
A number of,
How many fewer you're gonna euthanize in the next 6 months?
I never euthanized any of them.
You're out.
All right.
You're good.
You can put a number up, like how many are you going to help a local shelter to find a different outcome for? It could be 10.
Oh, I do about 60 to 100 a year. Just me.
All right. Put in 5 more.
5 more, okay.
You got to stretch.
No, I gotta do less.
You know, I want to add one thing.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with spay neuter in this community going on 9 years now. And a lot of the people that contact me are dealing with stray cats. And a lot of times they're abandoned situations. And all they're looking for is spay neuter, and they're going to take care of those cats. And I think the community will step up because most people want to be able to see the cats live.
I think most people want to be able to see the cats live. I do, you know, if you're with a public agency, if you're not a fast-moving agency, start small for these 6 months, these first 6 months, and know that you're going to need to build capacity for some of these programs. But still, even if you're at a public rule-bound agency, at a private agency without a lot of resources, still you can figure out 10. 10 times you can say to somebody, we're full, we wouldn't be able to find a home for that cat, do something else, here are some resources, have you thought about this? You should be able to schedule intake, discontinue your field pickups and just decrease it that way. Like, just
You can also
shrink
talk to your
the
local
bucket.
vet and ask your local vet to pledge a certain number of TNR surgeries to you. You have
tried
each
that.
local vet. Try again. Have them watch this video.
Yeah, well, that's what we need. Our
Yeah,
vets need to
that's-
come
You
and
can't
watch
give up.
it.
You
Yeah,
have to
we
keep
need
trying.
a lot more of that.
10 a month
because-
makes a huge difference. If you get
Yeah.
free or low cost,
That's
10
a
month.
gateway
We're
drug.
sending them out of the community. Ferals are all over the community for spay neuter.
Not mine, they all stay.
So as I said, and one of the ways I think about that is that for a long time we sort of provided an express on-ramp for the path to euthanasia.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is just close that on-ramp so that then communities kind of run up against the problem and have time to find more solutions. Because when we have unlimited intake, that creates an emergency. Once a cat is brought in, the clock is ticking. We don't have time to build a spay neuter clinic or talk with our community or find other solutions. But if we just can slow down and you got to take some back roads and drive around through some iffy neighborhoods to get onto the expressway to euthanasia, then a lot of times you just won't ever make it.
Well,
Yeah.
and Kate, it seems to me too that there could be a way to time some of this with other changes that just happen to be already going on in your community. Like, I don't know, in Reading, a brand new shelter opening now. That, you know, there's an easier part of path right now, possibly, to just sort of subtly say, oh, with the new shelter, we're not doing this anymore. Like,
That's great.
because you're already in communication mode, you know, with the community about, and so you're setting expectations again. You have this moment, and they'll just say, oh, okay. I mean, the good chance is that most people will say that. Didn't in San Jose, Kate, didn't John basically just decide that the law permitted him to do this? And he decided to count on asking forgiveness, not permission, from his city council. And they had such amazing results. Their city council was so proud of the results that they had and knew their community was so positive that there was just no going back. There was no, he took a chance that you're dealing with so many limited situations now waiting to get forgiveness was a lower risk than the mountain that permission would have required.
And I know in our community we've had budget cuts again and again, and we do not have the field officers to go pick up a healthy stray cat. We just don't have the resources, and unless people want to pay more taxes and still help us find a live release, we do not have the staff to do it. So we don't have the resources. I'm very sorry. We can no longer provide that service. It's not mandated by law. It's not benefiting the animals. We just don't do it. So
And, you know, in truth, I think that this is a great time to start it because
really, it's a slow time of year for us, and they're
Yes.
paying us to be there regardless. So it's a great opportunity for us to combine it with spay and neuter and say, if you keep this cat, we'll spay and neuter it for you. Just keep it. Please
Right.
don't give
Right.
it
Now's
to
a
us.
good time before kin season,
Right.
because maybe you
Yeah,
can
and
prevent.
then you can kind of get a jump start
Right.
on it. And I mean, it's not going to cost anything more, really. I
Right.
mean, we're there. They're paying us to be there. They're paying the staff to be there. We have to be there year round. And we have, you know, all these spaces that, all these animals that aren't getting done in that time period because we're slower with the public animals we're doing. We're slower with adoptions,
Yeah.
those type of things. So it is
Yeah.
a good time to start it and get it going, get the ball rolling.
Definitely. I mean, this is a great time of year. And one of the reasons I'm challenging you to just pick a number is, like, I'm anxious about this. You know, I'm saying this. I could be wrong. This could be a fiasco. I don't want to see this whole thing derailed by a big fiasco in a community. That's why I was like, you know, wow. We had a whole plan. We were going to work this whole
What
plan.
about Fresno? What
But
happened
then
there?
I also feel like, Jesus Christ, 756 cats a day. 350 cats while we're sitting here talking. Like, there is a risk in not acting. And I think we've brought this group together. You can support each other. You can develop resources together. Our economy is still kind of in the toilet. Right now, we have a good way to just say, you know what, we don't want to spend money on this because we have a lot of other things we got to spend money on. Let's just spend money on different things. So we have a moment here where I think we can act, and even if it is something small, where it's only going to impact 10 cats right now, if it's the beginning of a change, I think it'll build its own momentum.
Something you might want to be cautious of is if you talk to the money holders to say, we're going to stop doing this, our population will go down, they'll think, then we don't need as many people working here. We shall have fewer animals to deal with. You need to be cautious and prepare for that, to say, no, it means we can focus that energy where it needs to be spent, where we haven't had the opportunity to do that. So you're not going to spend the money on this, and you're going to have better control and service over on this side.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's not an excuse to just fire half the shelters down because you're not taking the cats anymore.
I have a question too. We get a lot of fear from our staff, even with sending animals out to rescue. They'll say, well, we can't do that because then we won't have enough adoptable pets. And it makes me crazy because there's so many. And I'm just like, just let them have them.
Transfer to another shelter that doesn't have good adoptions. You can
Right,
always
but
have
so
adoptable
how do you
pets.
combat that mentality that we can't let the cats go, or we can't intake them because then we won't have enough to adopt, or we can't let them go to rescue because then we won't have enough good ones to adopt? I mean, it's something that we battle
You will
a lot.
schedule intake
Yeah,
based on your adoptions.
right.
So every time you'll have a waiting list. So it's kind of like instead of storing your inventory on the shelf, where it's expensive and not comfortable for the inventory, it's stored in the warehouse, which is air conditioned.
So use that as
And on
those
site.
people's security blanket, like, those
Well,
animals are
your
still here,
waiting
and we
list.
can get them.
Like if you run out of
Yeah.
animals on your waiting list,
Right.
and you're like, whoa, the shelter is empty. This is bad, and
So
we're
there's not so much
calling.
fear.
Take Bob's number.
Yeah.
He'll set you up.
Well, how many times have you been so full that you can't accommodate anymore, and you've hoped somebody would call and say,
Constantly.
please, would you take these animals?
Yeah, I want to take them all.
Someone
We're now
near
in
you
the
is
opposite
always
situation.
euthanizing.
Today we have
Someone
14
near you is
cats.
always
Yeah.
euthanizing.
For cats, it's probably a false fear for a lot of communities for another couple of decades.
But there is that fear. I mean, I
But
think
there
it's
is
irrational fear,
there
but
is that fear, and that's
there
why it's
with
important to say
staff.
we're keeping the expressway to adoption wide open.
Right. But I think
We
having
just
the,
have, a red light so that we only can allow you onto the expressway when traffic is flowing
Right.
appropriately.
And I think maybe
And
when
I'm
there's a
happy to
willingness
help
helps.
you individually work with your adoption-driven capacity and your intake decision-making tool.
Yeah.
So those are a little bit complicated. I'm also happy to host a webinar for this whole group. If you want to talk about the details of establishing what should your capacity be. Because I think one great point that Bob made that we could all easily support is to say we are not meeting the minimum standard of care for cats. We have to provide cats with twice as much space. I mean, it's just a safe bet that any shelter can say that. And we need more staff time per cat, and we need more resources to deal with cats in the community. And so we're going to reallocate our resources, define our capacity, and then work to our capacity. Yeah.
We have waiting lists, and just so everybody knows, our euthanasia rate on cats was 77% 4 years ago, and we're below 25%.
Yes.
So it works really well. I would love to have it down to that 2 weeks, but we're more like 2-3 months. But people understand that. We also have a requested impoundment fee, so they pay $20 to drop cats off, which the community really doesn't like. But kind of like his experience, I haven't had the complaints like I thought I would. So it's working, and exactly like your statistics, it's almost exactly what I'm seeing. A lot of them, they found homes, they went missing, they sent them somewhere else, and so a lot of the ones that are on the waiting list, they do find their way home or whatever before we get them. So ultimately, we're euthanizing a lot less cats.
Yeah.
So it works.
Yeah. We can't solve all the problems of the world anyway, and that's the thing. Like, they continue to just occur and solve themselves while we do what we can do well. And it would just be so much more fun to be us doing what we can do well and actually just doing that. It's so much more fun. What do we do? Do we have 1,000? Do we need to start?
Oh, I
anymore?
haven't put my number, but I'm happy to.
All right, put your number. Put your number.
6 months?
6 months. Should we meet again in June?
Yes.
Do you think we need to?
Yes.
Let's, because that'll be the beginning. We'll be starting to get into kitten season.
Yeah.
And I think, there's going to be a whole other set of challenges then. And so I want you to know, like, I don't have all the answers. No individual person has all the answers, because this is cutting edge stuff. But we can come together with the experience of the next 6 months and then say, okay, like, what are we going to tackle in the next 6 months?
Yes, we have 1,000. We have more like 1,500.
1,500!
Yes.
Yay! Go team!
That's great.
I'm going to bring a cake and like 1,500 candles.
And then maybe a webinar in between on.
I'm happy to do 1 or 2 webinars on an
Scheduling,
intake
assessing.
decision-making tool and just sort of deciding your capacity. And I'll see if I can rope in somebody who's got some experience with scheduling. We'd also, I'm sure, rope in John, the San Jose guy, talk about a TNR, shelter-based TNR program. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Nice to hear you. Okay, we were in Chico.